Now back to the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
And welcome back to The Law Show on CL 650. We're talking about immigration and citizenship from MKS Law, immigration and citizenship lawyers. We have Gordon Maynard and Rudy Kisher in studio. And let's focus on Canada. The numbers of immigrants coming into Canada over the last decade at least has been growing every year pretty much. Right now we're over 300,000. So what are the latest numbers?
So this year the government sets a target every year in terms of how many. When we say immigrants, we're talking about people that will get permanent residency. These aren't citizens. These are people that get permanent residency. That is a pathway after being here as permanent residents for a certain time period. Then they qualify for citizenship. So the government sets a target every year, and this year it's the largest target that we've had, I think, since the 1920s. Is 305,000 people is the target for the government to bring in, and that's broken down into sort of three major categories. The one is an economic category, right, which takes up probably about you're looking at probably close to 50%. Then you have a family category, which is close to 30 to 40%, and then the last category is sort of refugee and humanitarian compassion, which sort of takes the last sort of 10-15%.
Where do most people come from? Well, I know Philippines has been a big one over the last decade. Is that still one of the top?
Philippines, I think on the last was the largest, actually. I think so. It's the Philippines, China, and India tend to be sort of the top in the top five, I would say, for the last 5 to 6 years. What happened? China used to be consistently at the top, but as our immigration program has changed with an increase in the language requirement, we've seen Filipinos actually sort of increase in numbers, and the amount of Chinese applicants being accepted decline.
Okay. So do you think this trend is going to continue, or are we going to end up at 350,000, 400,000? And there was chatter, I can't remember, in the last few months anyway, about the Liberals wanting to open the doors more to help get the economy moving.
There was a lot of talk about McCallum, the former Minister of Immigration, was floating around a number around 400,000. There was a report that had come out from an economic group that had basically said, the ideal number, we need more immigrants, and the ideal number would be to push it up to 400,000. And McCallum was trying to sort of float that test balloon at a bunch of speeches he made. And then Angus Reid came out with a study that said only 6% of Canadians support more immigration to Canada.
Well, I think the Liberals are looking for a way to jumpstart the economy, because we have this sort of stagnant economy. We have not really no growth across the country. Alberta has a big part to play in that with the lower oil. But if you bring more people in, they need to have a place to live. They need a mattress to sleep on. They need a TV. I mean, and you
also have guaranteed Liberal voters, right? I mean, my parents immigrated.
Wait a second. I'm always the one that calls the political angle here.
I'm just being honest.
That's good. So, Gordon, where do you think we're headed? Do you think if you have 6% of the population saying, well, that's that more is better, and the rest are saying that's enough, where do you think we're going to go?
Oh, great question. Rudy's right. There's a balance point that you have to meet. What's the perfect number of new immigrants to bring in to best jumpstart the economy? What's the right number to bring in that doesn't stress our social services? And I include education and medical services in there. What's the best number to bring in that doesn't stress the population's sense of security and sense of comfort with the immigration levels?
Well, then you have all these stresses also on housing. That's a big one that we see in Toronto and Vancouver. Is you can't afford to live in it.
The number that is the best number considering this is not necessarily the best number considering that. It's not necessarily the best number considering the third factor.
Right.
You got to find that balance point. You're asking me, what's the right balance point? Hey, I don't know. I don't know. I pay attention to when Rudy brings a survey forward and says, here's what the population is thinking. I pay attention to that the same way politicians pay attention to it. And I look at the events in the last year with the entry of the Syrian refugees and the numbers that were hit there. And that was an ambitious number that they went after in a short period of time. But then ask around in the community about the people who have to support those refugees and the groups of five, et cetera, the private sponsors and the social group, the community groups that have to help integrate them. Do they feel comfortable with that number? I think they feel stressed by it.
Well, the thing is, there was a great article I said, great article I read that said, what happens in the 13th month?
Exactly.
And
Same
so
article.
they're supported for 12 months. How, Rudy, you know this because you have...
We have a great story, yeah.
Tell us your story.
Yeah, so our church, Christ the Redeemer, in West Vancouver, has sponsored two families from Syria, from Aleppo. They came there. They were Catholics, and they were resettled through the sponsorship program that the Canadian government operates. And they arrived. They've now been here over 12 months, and it's been a fantastic story. So they arrived with their children. The kids are now going to school. They're speaking English. They both have jobs similar to their profession. They were both machinists. They're both working in similar fields.
Well, those are the kinds of jobs we always hear about that are going unfilled, right?
Unfilled, exactly. Yeah. And so that they speak the two the breadwinners in the family, the two husbands in the family and fathers had limited English, but that they had some English, and they were able to sort of find work. Their English has improved. They attend language classes twice a week now. They've moved out of their original housing, which was 2-bedroom. They were in 2-bedroom apartments. They've now moved into a house, split-level houses. So they've got 3 bedrooms because one family has 2 kids and the other one has 3, and with a daughter just turning 18, needed more space. So it's been a fantastic story. I mean, I don't know if all the stories are out there. So we've passed the 13-month. We've had the sort of talk of, okay, we've done we're there for emotional support and for guidance and everything else, but financially, you're on your own. And that was done with a weaning off process. So we sort of basically about 6 months ago, as they started becoming more independent and able to find, we had set them up with an initial household, but as they started to sort of make their own money and get set up, we started removing the financial support.
Can a machinist afford a house to rent in West Vancouver?
No. So that was a decision early on, which was a tough part in our sort of resettlement group as to where we would look for housing for them. And we were lucky they arrived faster. And so before we could find an actual place for them, and because of today's communication with email, we were able to start to discuss with them where would be a possible place for them. And people that have been traumatized have been resettled from Aleppo. I mean, you've seen the pictures of Aleppo.
Horrible,
There's nothing left. They moved to Jordan. They were in Amman, and then they resettled to Canada. To sort of have them move 2 or 3 times, we wanted to avoid that. And we thought, well, West Vancouver may not be the most affordable place for them to either find work or a home. And so we looked at different options for them. We thought about Surrey because there was a large Arabic Christian community out there that we thought that they might want to be, but they decided they had a friend in Burnaby, they had someone they knew, and so we looked for a place in Burnaby, and they actually ended up living in the same complex with their brother, and another brother's arrived and is now living in Powell River, but they were able to find something much more affordable in Burnaby. So it's worked out pretty good. He can walk to work, the kids are walking to school, and it's been a really happy story. So
a quick story, because we have less than a minute. I was in Winnipeg, and I was at the airport. I was there for an event, and waiting for I don't know if you've been to the Winnipeg airport. You come down an escalator to get to the carousels for the baggage, and there's this whole group of people with maple leaves and welcome and and they were waiting for 2 of the last remaining family members to arrive in Canada. The TV cameras were all there, and the family had been brought to Canada slowly, and the last 2 members came down, and it brings a tear to your eye.
Yeah.
It's something to watch. So I think it's been a good experience, stressful, I'm sure, for those communities, but I think overall it's been a good idea.
Yeah, I guess the big question is the numbers. When we were talking about numbers, has Canada reached that saturation point? I mean, another number that I found interesting on an Angus Reid study was 25% of Canadians would support the order that Donald Trump brought in. 25%.
There you go.
That's
that
number.
right wing we talked about, and if it gets fed, you never know what's going to happen.
I think 100% of that number don't know what the order is.
I think we'll leave it there. That's the voice of Gordon Maynard from MKS, and Rudy Kisher has also been our guest from MKS Law in downtown Vancouver, immigration and citizenship lawyers. Great discussion as always, gentlemen. We'll have you back soon. That's all the time we have for today. I'm Zach Spencer. We'll speak to you next time on CL 650.